13 today, we see a man who runs ahead of God, who cannot wait for God to act. And so he ignores God's blessing in his life. Back in 2003 at the Buick Open at the Doral Country Club in Miami, Scott Hoke. Some of you golfers, I'm not a golfer, I don't know. What? Scott Hoke was playing. It was the last hole. It was a sudden death playoff. He was in a tie. It was getting dark. He had a 6-foot putt to make for birdie to keep the game going, to keep his hopes of a championship alive. And he's looking at this thing, but as he's looking at it, it keeps getting darker and darker, and he can't see the grass. He can't see the lay of the green. And he's thinking it's going to break left. His caddy's saying, no, I think it's going to break right. And finally he says, we're just going to call it off right now. It's too dark. I can't see. We'll play this tomorrow. All of the crowd is disappointed. They don't get to see the end of this. The TV stations are going, wait, what? You can't do this. Nobody's going to watch at 10:30 tomorrow morning. You know, it was done. But Scott said, I can't see. I can't go on. Now, Mr. Hoke has had like 5 eye surgeries. So, it's understandable that he couldn't see. In the morning, they played it. They played the sudden death hole. He found out his caddy was right, and it would have broke right. And so he makes the birdie, and he wins the tournament. The reason I bring this up is not because I'm a golf fan. Sorry, Don. It's not because I'm a golf fan, but because he waited for the light that he needed. He waited until he could see. He waited until he had an opportunity, and when God gave him the light, when the light came into the world, when the light came into his life and he finally could see, he realized that he would have made a mistake. He realized that he would have lost, and God gave him the victory. This is what Saul neglected to do. He just said, I can do this. I can see this. I know what's going to happen. I know what's going to take place. I can take care of this all myself. He just did it himself. And he lost. He lost the right to have an eternal dynasty, to have his son sit on the throne. That was eventually given to David. And David obeyed the Lord and was given that right. Now, chapters 13, 14, and 15 are sort of the bridge between them getting a king and God setting up the kingship and actually having a good king and actually having it set up the way God wanted it to set up. And in 16, we'll see the rise of David, but in the meantime, bad things happen. The point of these 3 chapters is that God is going to reject Saul as their king. He is not going to be obedient. He is a sinful man. He is a man who wants to do it his way, and he's just not going to follow after God. And so God rejects Saul as king. This chapter and the one that follows it are dedicated to those battles that they're having with the Philistines. The Philistines are putting pressure on them from the west. Last week we talked about the Ammonites coming from the east, and now the Philistines are coming from the west, and they're the superpower of their day, and they're making inroads into Israel. And Saul had come to the throne specifically for the purpose of defeating the Philistines. The Israelites said, we don't want a judge anymore. The judges aren't helping us win these battles. We want a king who will lead us against the Philistines. This is why he had come, and this is why God had appointed him. He had all the tools necessary to fulfill this mandate, and yet he doesn't accomplish what God has wanted him to do. Saul fulfilled his duty in the Ammonites last week, but that was a momentary success, and this is the beginning of the end of all that Saul wanted to accomplish. The end of his life, the end of his dynasty, the end of his being a king. This is the beginning step. This is the first step that he takes. The ultimate failure, though, is not his inability to defeat the Philistines. His ultimate failure was in his relationship with God. He could have beat the Philistines. He was a great warrior. He had a great army. He could do all of that. But he did not trust in the Lord. His relationship with God went south, and his armies were defeated, he was defeated, and he lost the kingship because of his relationship with God. He had the earthly resources, but God was no longer on his side. So let's look at this chapter today. The first thing that we come across is that the Philistines are back on the warpath. Can I use that in this day of political correctness? Warpath? They're attacking from the west, and the wars start to be renewed. The opening verse, though, seems to have suffered over the years. If you look in your Bibles, you'll see that there's a couple brackets underneath the 30 and the 42. And some of your Bibles don't even have those, they just have a blank. In the Hebrew and the Greek copies of the Old Testament that we have, there are no numbers there. It doesn't tell us when Saul started his reign, and it doesn't say how long he reigned. And we don't know if this is accidental or if it's on purpose. If it's on purpose, and I think it probably is, then this incomplete reference to Saul's reign seems to be very ironic when it comes to Saul's flawed reign. There were gaps in his life, and there are gaps in the Bible. Saul's introduction is as flawed as he is. It's just not there. We've filled them in from other places. But it seems like, the author is telling us right at the beginning, we don't even want to know how long this guy has been around, because he is flawed as well. Jonathan also appears. It doesn't mention that he's Saul's son. That's mentioned way later in the chapter. But right here at the beginning, he first comes on the scene. He is a mighty commander. He is a powerful general in Saul's army. He leads this military division, and he attacks, and this precipitates a war. This is the first opening shot of this war with the Philistines. And the Philistines mass their armies, and Saul has to mass his army as well. It escalates into this full-fledged war from this tiny skirmish in this tiny outpost. Well, the next verses talk about Saul's gathering his army and what he does in preparation for war. He meets at Gilgal, and we're not really sure where all these places are anymore. And they bring him down to the plain there. I liked this picture because it's really steep and there's lots of goats. I don't know why I like the goats, but you can hardly see the goats, can you? But Saul met there at Gilgal and brought his army together and thought, well, I brought the army together against the Ammonites. I'll just do it again against the Philistines, and we'll have a real easy time conquering them. Well, the Philistines, as you read in this chapter, seems to have some insurmountable odds. I don't know if you've ever faced horrible odds against you, but sometimes we feel like we're just all alone against the world. And Saul did as well. The Philistines had everything. They had numbers. They had lots of people. They had super weapons. It spends a lot of the time in this chapter talking about their weapons and the fact that the Israelites didn't even have them. All they had were hoes and pitchforks and some spears made out of wood. Saul's army was outnumbered and outgunned, and he was in lots of trouble. Many of the troops start to scatter. They go, I'm not fighting this war. They've got the weapons of mass destruction, and I'm leaving town. And so they start leaving. And Saul has been directed to wait for 7 days. Samuel has been very explicit. He's been very direct, and he's saying, you need to wait here for 7 days, and I'll show up, and I'll give you some direction. You see, the king was not free to initiate warfare in Israel. The king was still under God's command. He still had to answer to a higher authority. This was the difference between Canaanite kings and Israelite kings. The Canaanite kings could do whatever they wanted, and a lot of Israelite kings did that as well. But the Israelite kings were supposed to answer to God. And so he